What Trump's trade war would mean. On February 1st, President Donald Trump imposed tariffs on Canada, China, and Mexico, the United States' largest trading partners. US importers will pay a 25% tax on all goods from Canada and Mexico, as Trump tries to force both countries to curb migration and drug trafficking into the United States. Imports from China, meanwhile, will face 10% tariffs, punishment for Beijing's failure to rein in the smuggling of fentanyl precursor chemicals to Canada and Mexico, where they are made into US bound fentanyl. Now, how could tariffs affect the United States? Nearly half of all US imports, more than 1.3 trillion, come from Canada, China, and Mexico. However, analysis by Bloomberg Economics shows that the new tariffs could overall reduce US imports by 15%. While the Washington DC based tax foundation estimates that the tariffs will generate around 100 billion per year in extra federal tax revenue, they could also impose significant cost on the broader economy, disrupting supply chains, raising cost for businesses, eliminating hundreds of thousands of jobs, and ultimately driving up consumer prices. Certain sectors of the US economy will be hit particularly hard, including the automotive, energy, and food sectors. Gas prices could surge as much as 50 cents per gallon in the Midwest, as Canada and Mexico supply more than 70% of crude oil imports to US refineries. A 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico will raise production cost for US automakers, adding up to 3,000 to the price of some of roughly 16 million cars sold in the United States each year. Also at risk are cars and other vehicles, as the United States imports nearly half of its auto parts from its northern and southern neighbors. Grocery cost could also rise, as Mexico is the United States' biggest source of fresh produce, supplying more than 60% of US vegetable imports and nearly half of all fruit and nut imports. Still, the United States is less reliant on trade than many other industrialized economies, including Germany, Japan, and the United Kingdom. Imports and exports make up just a quarter of US GDP, and the United States sources what it does import from a fairly broad set of nations. Now, how could tariffs affect Mexico? Tariffs will hit Canada and Mexico much harder, as trade makes up about 70% of both economies' GDP. The two countries are particularly dependent on trade with the United States. More than 80% of Mexico's exports, including cars, machinery, fruits, vegetables, and medical equipment, head north, accounting for 15% of total US imports. This dependence is especially pronounced on Mexico's northern border. The northern states account for nearly half of Mexico's export to the United States, sending more than 200 billion worth of computers, electronics, transportation equipment, and other products each year. A unilateral 25% tariff on these goods could slash Mexico's GDP by some 16% according to Bloomberg Economics, with Mexico's auto industry bearing the brunt. Mexico sends nearly 80% of the cars it produces to the United States alone, amounting to some 2.5 million vehicles each year. Duties will also threaten Mexico's energy sector. The United States is the recipient of roughly 60% of Mexico's petroleum exports, most of which is crude oil bound for US refineries. At the same time, Mexico is the top destination for US refined oil exports, which meet over 80% of domestic demand. US tariffs likely make fuel more expensive, raising price at the pump and straining Mexico's broader economy. Canada faces a similar challenge. The United States buys more than 70% of Canada's exports, with these goods making up 14% of total US imports. Under the new tariffs, Canada's energy sector will take the biggest hit as exporters send 80% of their oil south. Now, how could tariffs affect China? China is comparatively less dependent on the United States and less reliant on trade overall. Over the past 2 decades, the country has steadily reduced the importance of trade to its economy as Beijing has ramped up domestic production. Today, import and exports account for only about 37% of China's GDP, compared to more than 60% in the early 2000s. In recent years, US-China trade has declined, particularly in sectors hit by previous tariffs and export controls such as auto parts, data servers, furniture, and semiconductors. China has instead ramped up trade with other partners, including the European Union, Mexico, and Vietnam. The country's share of global trade has climbed roughly 4% since 2016, when President Trump first took office, even as the United States' share has dipped. Combined, these factors will lessen the shock of an additional 10% tariff on Chinese exports to the United States. The Canadian dollar and Mexican peso will also plunge further due to these tariffs. Retaliatory tariffs on the United States would predominantly affect manufacturing heavy states. Mexico buys 70% of New Mexico's exports, including billions of dollars in US semiconductor chips and electrical components that later return to the United States in Mexican-made cars and appliances. Texas sends more than 20 billion in chips, auto parts, and electrical equipment to Mexico. Overall, the state's southbound exports account for 5% of its GDP. Tariffs would also dent Ohio's 5 billion worth of auto and metal exports to Canada, as well as Maine's 320 million in northbound lumber and paper exports. Thanks for watching this video. Please like, share and subscribe.